Welcome to the podcast of All Means All. In this episode, Nysha Givans, Cappello, and Tracy Fletcher will talk about marginalized students in classrooms.
Nysha, what does marginalization mean?
There's no official definition in relation to marginalisation. However, there is a discourse surrounding marginalisation. This discourse talks about the processes which individuals or groups can go through, which can affect them, such as society, where they have little to low socio-economical power and less political power. This then pushes them to the edge of society and often results in these groups having limited accesses to resources, opportunities, rights, and which are readily available to more dominant groups.
Educational marginalization is defined as an unfair, favored, or biased distribution of access to learning facilities, and resources based on geography, gender, socio-economic conditions, or personal position.
Research shows that students have higher levels of achievement and well-being when they feel that they belong. Unfortunately, marginalisation can have a negative impact upon students' sense of belonging.
And what does it mean to feel belonging in spaces of learning?
Inclusive education is meant to tackle all students' diversities in order to reduce all forms of exclusion, marginalisation and inequalities, and to guarantee quality of education for all. For marginalised students, feeling a sense of belonging in educational spaces means experiencing acceptance, value and inclusion within the academic community, despite the systemic barriers they face.
Inclusive education involves full participation and high-quality learning for all learners. This definition is based on the one proposed by Booth and Ainscow in the Index for Inclusion 2011. This broad definition focuses on diversity and inclusion of all learners and not on specific groups. Furthermore, it's a definition that overcomes the idea of inclusion as the simple placement of students in a mainstream setting. Coexistence is only the starting point, but then involvement, sharing and quality of learning processes are explicitly addressed.
So, Tracy, who are marginalized students and how are they evidenced in the classroom today?
Well, we use the term marginalised students to refer to those students who experience an unfair or inequitable access to learning. Students who are different from the dominant norms of identity may experience marginalisation. So this can include students who are, for example, neurodiverse, those from low-income backgrounds, racial, cultural minorities, those who speak a different language, those with physical disabilities, or those with different sexualities. Access to learning for marginalised students is often limited and of a poorer quality in comparison to the standard of education that their non-marginalised peers receive. This leads to certain students being treated unfairly and excluded. Sometimes students just aren't seen and not acknowledged.
Bell Hooks discusses identity in the following manner. Oppressed and exploited groups breed identity politics, which enables the critique of dominant structures. This gives their struggle both purpose and meaning. By allowing students to discuss their personal experiences, allows both student and the teacher to learn.
Which forms of marginalisation exist?
Marginalisation in the classroom can exist in a number of ways, and some are more explicit than others. Some of the more obvious forms of marginalisation can include othering, where students who are different are singled out and alienated, microaggressions, isolation, and racism and discrimination. However, there are also subtle forms of marginalisation, such as micro-exclusion. This might not be as obvious as other types of exclusion, such as segregation of students or discrimination of ethnic groups. However, it can have a significant effect on a student's success and attainment. So an example of micro-exclusion could be a student who is an immigrant who is allowed to attend a class with their peer group, but is given material that is different to the other students. So on the surface, it appears that they are included, however, they're not being given the same access or the same standard of the curriculum as their peers. The framework of intersectionality also considers the combined range of factors or parts of a student's identity that can contribute to marginalisation. For example, in the classroom, a student might be marginalised due to a combination of their gender, their ethnic background, along with perhaps a disability. This type of student could then experience a higher level of discrimination due to these aspects of their identity.
One of the most explicit and marginalizing experiences is the push and pull out phenomenon, which describes all of those situations where a pupil or a group of pupils are removed from the classroom and carry out activities far from their classmates. Such exclusion can be linked to internal class factors, like, for example, a teacher who cannot manage pupils' behaviors and sends them out with another teacher, or with to external factors, like a well-equipped space that attracts pupils out of the classroom. Another form of marginalization, often more covert than the previous one, is the school disaffection. This describes all those circumstances based on students' difficulty in perceiving contact between the school and the world outside, as well as in those students who continue to perform the assigned tasks, leaving the classroom experience with low participation and involvement. So even if they are physically present in the classroom, they are mentally absent and reluctant towards learning. There are also cases in which school disaffection is visible, with manifestations of low sense of belonging to the school, lack of interest and commitment, dislike of certain teachers or of certain types of teachers. In some cases, there are also extreme situations of school disaffection where the individuals can no longer tolerate social norms, and they demonstrate it with negative emotions towards institutions, unjustified absence, and destructive behaviors. So these negative experiences could lead to school dropout phenomena that is another visible form of marginalization, even if the causes are different, like sociocultural, related to the school, or personal.
Who's responsible for marginalized students?
We believe that all actors connected to or working in education have a responsibility for tackling marginalisation by promoting an inclusive school. For example, the school leadership can develop a school-wide policy to establish and set the tone for an inclusive school culture. In practice, this means actively nurturing a safe space for students to be themselves by providing the necessary resources, such as support staff and continuous training for teachers to enable inclusive work to be carried out. However, a top-down approach is not enough. All members of the school community can take responsibility in their own way by considering how they can support students. On the classroom level, for example, teachers can take responsibility by being mindful and aware of classroom dynamics and diversity, using inclusive language, and by being open-minded to applying inclusive pedagogy. Although teachers often have good intentions, it's also possible that they bring a range of unconscious biases with them. So it's important to reflect upon one's own views, position, and context. Classmates can also be encouraged to include other students, and even students themselves can take responsibility for their own situation by being conscious of their surroundings and how they engage in their learning process. In the wider community, we can consider extending the circle of support by involving parents and other members of the community.
How can educators create inclusive learning environments that validate the identities and experiences of marginalized students?
Creating an inclusive learning environment for marginalised students involves recognising their value, their diverse identities and experiences. Educators should focus on integrating diverse perspectives into the curriculum and fostering an atmosphere of mutual respect and support. It's important to create a safe space where all students feel comfortable expressing themselves and where their backgrounds are acknowledged and respected. Building strong, supportive relationships with students and involving families and communities in an educational process can enhance this sense of belonging. Additionally, ensuring that teaching practice and materials reflect and celebrate diversity helps all students feel seen and valued. Finally, continuous professional development for educators on issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion is crucial to maintain an environment that supports the academic and social success of all students.
A positive school culture and classroom culture recognises the value that all students bring to the learning environment. This involves the acknowledgement of diversity and the celebration of the variety of different identities that make up the student body. In the classroom, this could include collaborative work between students and using a variety of materials that represent the different identities that are present in the classroom.
So, how can curriculum content and teaching methodologies be adapted to reflect diverse perspectives and histories, empowering marginalized students to see themselves positively represented in their education?
Adapting curriculum content to reflect diverse perspectives and histories involve incorporating materials and resources that showcase the contributions, experiences and viewpoints of various cultural, ethnic and social groups. This can include text, case studies and examples that represent a wide range of backgrounds and narratives, integrating literature by authors from marginalised communities, highlighting historical events from multiple perspectives and discussing contemporary issues related to diversity and equity can help marginalised students see themselves reflected positively in their education. Teaching methodologies can be adapted to reflect diverse perspectives and histories by using inclusive pedagogical approaches. This includes employing culturally responsive teaching practices that acknowledge and respect the cultural background of all students. Collaborative learning, project-based activities and discussions that encourage students to share their own experiences and viewpoints can foster an inclusive classroom environment. Utilising multimedia resources and guest speakers from diverse backgrounds can also enrich the learning experience and provide students with multiple ways to engage with the content.
What strategies can support marginalized students, address systemic barriers, and prevent marginalization in classrooms?
Existing strategies that effectively address marginalisation in the classroom involve several key approaches. Culturally responsive teaching integrates students' cultural background into both curriculum and pedagogy, validating the identities of marginalised students and enhancing their engagement and academic performance. This method helps students feel acknowledged and respected, boosting their motivation and participation. Restorative practices, which focuses on community building rather than punitive measures, creates a positive classroom climate, reduces the need for suspension and expulsion, and supports students' social, emotional development, which is especially beneficial for those who may feel marginalised. Addressing systemic barriers involves implicit bias training and recruiting diverse staff to mitigate biases and to ensure equitable resource allocation. Differentiated instructions, mentorship programs and support services like counselling and tutoring help accommodate diverse learning needs. Anti-bullying policies, inclusive classroom practices and cultural competence training further creates a supportive environment. This would foster a more equitable and inclusive educational system.
Teacher education and continuous professional development is a vital element in working against marginalisation. Teachers with insufficient training might not be aware of the different needs and challenges that exist in the classroom and how to address them. Teachers should feel supported, empowered, and able to have the agency to work in a manner that confronts marginalisation. While we also recognise the importance and influence of government policy, teachers should also feel that they can challenge those aspects that might cause marginalisation.
Other possible strategies and approaches to address systemic barriers and prevent marginalization are the universal design for learning, so UDL, the open learning, and the teacher collaboration. With the UDL, it's possible to recognize the individual differences and to pay attention to the context in terms of barriers and benefits for students, where contents are represented in different forms, in different formats. Each individual can have more ways of action and expression, and teachers can motivate and engage students in multiple forms. Open learning is instead a student-centered approach with more freedom of choice based on different degrees of openness. On the first level, it could be possible to have an openness of the organization, where the pupils can decide where, when, and with whom they are learning. On the second level, the openness is methodological, and it's possible to choose how to learn something, so in terms of learning strategies. A third openness level is related to learning goals and contents, so what the students would like to learn. And the last one, the last level, works on socialization, relationships, and rules, namely on the class community. With these kind of approaches, it's possible to include everyone and to create a context where everyone could perceive to be included. Of course, teacher collaboration plays an important role because there are different forms of co-teaching, like, for example, one teaches, one assists, or one observes, and parallel alternative station teaching. With these models, it's possible to reduce contextual barriers, improving the benefits for students.
Other strategies that can be applied include mentoring, having an assigned person to assist each student, or a key person approach, or peer body programs and initiatives. And you can read more about strategies and approaches, as well as other contents of this video in our chapter in much more detail.
Thank you for listening to the podcast of All Means All. In the show notes, there is a link to the chapter in the open textbook. There you can find the transcript of the video and more information on the topic.